Hello and welcome to the Transfer Flow podcast. It's me, your host, Patrick Van Straten, and I'm joined by Ravi Ramaneni. How are you, Ravi?
Hi, Patrick. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm good. Since we last spoke, football has begun. We now, I guess, get to figure out whether all our takes are going to make us look stupid over the course of the season, which is always fun. Like, this is the thing. I've been on YouTube, I guess, like making predictions, highlighting players now for about 10 years. And so there's a real treasure trove of bad opinions of mine that people can find out there. I'm amazed that somebody hasn't like presented me with a dossier, but I'm sure that we'll come up with some more during the remainder of the transfer window.
I think I'm racking up my share of bad opinions and bad takes as well, even though I've been on YouTube only like a month or two, and but it's okay. I think football is a lot of it is opinions, and you try to say things as intelligently as you can based on what you've learned and what you know. But again, like football is a game where there is a lot of variance and luck and happenstance involved. So yeah, sometimes we look great, sometimes we don't.
Yeah, plus I just think like there's always somebody who's annoyed that you're not agreeing with them, but I just don't really see the value in everybody saying the same thing to you. It seems insulting for you not to give your honest opinion. And look, there are certain players who, if they come up, if for some reason James Ward-Prowse comes up on one of our podcasts, Ravi, I have an issue with that guy. But I don't think there's anybody that I despise today, but we'll find out. Because we're going to talk about the opening games of the Premier League season, and we're also going to have a look at Real Madrid as well, who had quite an interesting opening fixture. So should we kick off with Chelsea versus Manchester City? Which was the prestige fixture of the weekend in the Premier League, and City won 2-0. Going in, I think that quite a lot of people are quite bullish on Chelsea because of the absence of Rodri. Because as misshapen and overloaded as that squad is, it is absolutely rammed with talent. And I don't know, there was a feeling that maybe something would come out of this. So in the end, it was a pretty straightforward victory for City. Though expected goals had it about level. That felt like City saying, we'll do something if we need to do something.
For sure.
But what stood out to you about the game, though? Because there were several interesting selections, especially from Pep. Whereas on Maresca's side, in the end, I was like relatively unsurprised by the 11 he put out. It was quite conventional.
Yeah, I mean, I did not expect Savinho to start for City in the first game, but owing to some of the absences and all the Euro-related absences, that was probably the idea. I thought he looked the part, especially when they switched him to the right. I think maybe midway through the first half, he looked really good, I thought. And I think that one of the criticisms of City last season, or maybe that's the last part of last season, was that they weren't using Haaland's strengths enough, as in like they wanted to, he's this 193 or 195, like the most athletic, tall center forward ever type player, but they weren't really using a lot of his ability to kind of win the ball in the air. And but I thought that playing true wingers, maybe that's a little bit of a way of like, okay, let's get him more touches, because Haaland doesn't touch the ball a lot. I think in the first half he touched like 8 times or 10 times and scored a wonder goal. So maybe the idea is that maybe they want to try one of the wrinkles they're maybe trying is try to get him more involved, or get him into situations where teams have to defend him, in a more traditional sense as a center forward in the box. But I thought Savinho looked great. I also liked Rico Lewis playing on the right and, going into the midfield, and that opening up the releasing Bernardo and the midfielders to go attack. I thought I did not expect that from him. Like, but I thought that was really good. That's probably a progression of a young player from season to season. You can see in front of our eyes how he's getting better. I think Jeremy Doku looked really good, I thought, as well, for them. In general, I thought the game had a lot of pressing involved, both sides. I expected that from Chelsea, but I thought City did a good job of pressing as well. I thought there were moments I thought in the first half it was insanely high press game. But as expected, first game of the season, by about 60 minutes, both teams sort of cooled off to a degree.
Yeah.
And that happens a lot. And I want to caveat all my opinions about games in week one is that it's week one. A lot of teams, are just, they're all of them are coming off of preseasons, and it's not like a switch that they will automatically play at their finest and at they play like well-oiled machines right away. So it's going to take a couple of games before they hit their speed. So I think you would see a lot of that, and a lot of games sort of physically diminishing by 60, 65, unless teams made like wholesale subs to bring on 3 or 4 guys by then to refresh the players on the field. But I thought City looked very good. Chelsea, I thought I expected worse, from them, just because of,
yeah, sure.
Despite all the talent, like the question marks around how is Maresca going to mold this into a squad that is going to compete week in, week out? Who are the players? What are their roles? So I think the uncertainty was what made me expect that Chelsea probably wasn't going to play that well. But I was surprised. I thought they pressed very well. There were moments they looked very good. I thought Jackson looked good. And then I thought he also had the chance to equalize, where if he was like a half a foot not offside, I think he would have had the chance that when Ederson made the mistake of spilling the ball. So I thought they played pretty well in patches, but it always looked like a game City had under control, despite what XG says here. I think a lot of it is score effect, where City were playing with the lead most of the time, and they didn't really have to kick into another gear to come back into the game. I wish the Nico Jackson goal stayed onside. Then it would have been a good game. I thought second half would have opened up.
Yeah, I think that City had control after the goal.
Yeah.
And probably after the switch of the wingers, they had more control as well. Because as you say, I mean, the Chelsea fullbacks just couldn't really deal with them. Like Savio and Doku, I think, had 9 carries into the penalty area between them, which is hilarious. And I mean, Doku was like this last season. He was like this at the Euros. I mean, I looked at him in this game. He was 5 for 8 on dribbles, and 17 progressive carries in this game, which is funny. I mean, it's like a team total from this one guy. And I guess you can afford to kind of play with more conventional wingers when you've got so much passing in the middle. But it was weird to see Pep put a left footer on the left, a right footer on the right. I don't know. I was just like, is this? Am I watching Sean Dyche here? Like, what's going on? They've got a big guy up front. They've got a left footer. They've got a Dwight McNeil on the left. But you know what I mean? It feels like something different. It feels like, obviously we'll see if an experiment like this lasts. But generally speaking, over the last few seasons, we've seen Pep use one sort of wide playmaker, one kind of wide 10 type, whether it's Grealish, whether it's Foden. In this game, though, Doku and Savinho are better passers than you would expect from a lot of wingers, as you would expect from guys who Pep Guardiola had signed. Neither one of them is the come inside and playmate guy. Like, they want to take on fullbacks. So it was strangely kind of conventional. It was like 10 years ago, the football that I was watching. And
it was. Yeah, I wonder at some level Pep gets bored and wants to do something different.
He definitely does. Every season, his best centre back from the previous season, he'll bench. Like when Laporte was one of the players of the season, he was like, he's not playing next year. And I think he did it with Diaz as well.
And it's almost like, when you are doing something like an exercise, like a running drills, or you want to increase the level of difficulty so that you progress. So it might be that, well, this year I want to win the title without doing X or Y, which has been very successful for me. I'm joking here, but like sometimes that thought passes my mind that maybe that's how he's he's like, "Wow, I can do this with my left hand tied to my back," or something like that. But yeah, but it definitely feels like he's trying something different. And I think that's one thing I would say is a lot of times with Pep, I think he's always someone that is innovating or evolving. Maybe innovating is a big word, but let's say evolving. He evolves to changes in football. Or maybe he's a step ahead where he sees something last season and he's like, okay, this may not work if we try it again next year. Let's change the question because people are finding answers to our to playing against us. So I'm going to change the question again. So that there is a bit of that, I think, with Pep. I don't think he when people think about Pep's football, even in Barcelona, the 2008-9 Barcelona is so different from the 12-13, which was his last season. So I do think that. And going back to the game, I thought Kovacic did a great imitation of Rodri, playing in his spot. I thought he was very good.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, it made for an easy headline, I guess, for the writers to see this like former Chelsea midfielder they sold for about 25 million, like walk through all their other midfielders. I get that, but it's the one interesting thing I thought though is that yes, City were in control of the game, and first game of the season, Rodri's not there, not fully operational yet, sure, but it was interesting that Chelsea were able to get into the box so much. Chelsea had 24 touches in the City box. City had 25 touches in the Chelsea box. And last season, City only gave up more than 24 touches in their box 4 times. Once against Liverpool, once against Villa, once against Arsenal, once against Newcastle. And they only won one of those games. They lost 2. So I was kind of like, is this obviously I'd need to see that persist to really think much of it. But it's a Chelsea side that have only had a preseason. It's a Chelsea side that presumably is going to evolve as well. It was interesting to me that they were able to do this, and I wasn't quite sure whether this was a Maresca plan working or billions of pounds worth of player quality kind of shining through, and those guys just doing stuff.
In most cases like this, the answer is a bit of both, and a few other things that we haven't mentioned here. I do think Cole Palmer looked very good for them, like someone creating chances, and I really feel had the Jackson shot gone in, we would have had a real good game in the second half. Sorry, his shot went in if it wasn't called offside. I do think it would have been a really good game in the second half. Chelsea playing at home, but yeah, I mean, I think they have good players, and I really am very hesitant to draw a lot of conclusions for Chelsea from this game. They haven't won this fixture in 4 years, I think. They mentioned it on the broadcast, and so probably you expected them to drop all 3 points in this match, and which is what happened. I want to see them at a next couple of games when they play more. I think they start playing against teams that are more their level or lesser level. I want to hold my judgment until that. But I think that the real problem for Chelsea is not on the field, but how are they getting there with all the noise around the squad size and who is in, who is out. I think to me that's the area that's really interesting on their side right now.
I think that's a really good point to talk about Raheem Sterling, because Raheem Sterling left out of the squad, and his reps, I think, released this statement where they said they wanted clarity around his position in the squad, and he'd been preparing for the season, and Maresca said that he was left out. It was a technical decision that he was left out, and Kim in the Transfer Flow newsletter was pretty damning of that statement. And I think rightly so, because when Sterling got on the field last year, this idea that he was terrible, it just doesn't wash. He had more goal involvements than everyone bar Jackson and Palmer. His underlying numbers in passing into the box, in shots, in expected goals, all that stuff really trailed those 2 guys. And the fact that he would not get in when, say, Mark Guiu came off the bench, or when Mykhailo Mudryk was on the bench, who has certainly done absolutely nothing since moving to Chelsea. that does seem reasonable. And the bigger issue here is Jamie Carragher came out after this, and a bunch of people came out and said, "Oh, Raheem Sterling shouldn't be making statements. He should be trying to move on, or he should be playing his way back into contention." And it's fairly clear that he can't. He played better than a bunch of these guys who made the squad last season, and he's still not in the squad. And it's fairly clear that Chelsea would like to move him on if they could. But he earns 17 million a year or something. And this is exactly the problem that everybody had with this project at Chelsea, right? These guys are on huge contracts. How do you get rid of them? And Chelsea are learning you can't just ship them off to Saudi at will.
Yeah, ship them off to Saudi at will, or even move them around to other teams within the league on loans.
Sure.
They would still probably end up having to take huge sums of eat a lot of the wages for teams to take the players off of their hands. And I think that's the big problem they have now is, in general, selling players is very hard in football. Selling players with profit is harder. But selling players when teams know that you have to sell by a certain date, it's almost impossible to get a deal that you like. And so, and it goes to against, and it's not even football. Like, I don't have to go into philosophy, but I think it's the same thing everywhere. When everybody knows you are going to sell, they will wait to get the best price, and the best price is for them, not for you. So I think Chelsea is in that problem right now, that they have to cut down the squad. They have a lot of players, and all of them are on big wages. Even the younger players are on huge wage that you wouldn't expect a young player to be on, like a 20-year-old to be on £125,000 a week type wages. That's not very normal. Yes, there are a few that make that, but those are exceptional players that are playing starter minutes. But in Chelsea, a lot of players cannot play starter minutes because they literally have so many players.
Well, and they don't seem to really think that this is a problem because they're adding more guys to the books. I mean, Raheem Sterling, I think, is a really interesting candidate for a move. Like, I don't know who Chelsea would let him go to, but there are plenty of teams looking for wingers. I don't think they'd let him go to Arsenal, but Arsenal want a winger. Barcelona have been looking for a winger. Everyone we've been talking about over the last few weeks would surely benefit from a Raheem Sterling, but they're not going to want to cover all his wages, and Chelsea might not want to let him go there. Now they're adding Joao Felix to this, so this is now done. Joao Felix joining until 2030 with another option. Only the 6-year contract for Joao Felix. So, obviously Chelsea are on the fence about how good he's going to be. You can argue, I think, that you maybe need somebody to play in the hole behind the striker rather. Enzo Fernandez was kind of getting into that spot at the weekend, and it's not really what he's good at. They have bought Dewsbury Hall, who's kind of meant to do some of this stuff, and Nkunku could feasibly do it as well. But Joao Felix presumably gonna take this role, do you think, or do you have any bead on how Chelsea are going to use him?
Joao Felix can play, I think, the left wing or like, as you said, the whole like a 10 role behind the striker. I think he has to be. He's an in-between player that can play he can play 2 or 3 different positions at a high level, but nothing like he can do. He can be like an out-and-out starter for like a top team in one of those positions. I think he can do a really good job. And this is why last time we talked about Joao Felix was when the rumor was that he might go to Aston Villa.
Yeah,
that's a completely different conversation because Aston Villa, when he walks into Aston Villa, he would be the most likely, arguably the most talented player coming into the side, and you can build a team around him. And that's the crux of the issue here with Joao Felix, is that you need the team built around him because he can do different things that he's like a combination that is not usual, that can play, that have those combination of skills to play at that high level. But he also comes with some caveats that defensively, out of possession, I think we mentioned it when we talked about him last time also, that out of possession, it's almost like you're playing with a man down when you have him on the field. He doesn't really, doesn't get into duels, doesn't engage players, not a great presser. Although maybe you could take him and say like, you do one defensive thing for me and just make him do that. Like maybe play him, make him press but still, I think we're talking someone that can't do it now. That is a big, if you're paying 50, 60 million for a player, that's usually starter money.
Hmm.
And then now you're saying you have to hide him when you're out of possession. That's a second that's hard. And so and this is why, like, if you're going to build a team around him, saying like, look, my team is going to be run by Joao Felix, my attack is going to be run by Joao Felix, I'm going to put players around him to cover his deficiencies or weaknesses. That's a different conversation, but that's not Chelsea. I don't think Chelsea can do that, or I don't think he's that level to do it. He's not a Messi to walk into a top level
Hmm.
Premier League team, or prime Messi to say, well, build a team around me. I don't think he's that level. If you have
No.
to be a cog in the whole system, then you have to do all the duties of that role. And that's where it's going to be an issue to start him. I think he'll be productive when he plays, but in terms of goals and assists and chance creation, he'll be very productive. But he also brings a lot of, like, how do you solve for his deficiencies, especially out of possession?
Sure.
That was going to be a big question.
Yeah, sure. So the idea might be, okay, we use him in these games, but not in these games. But it just feels like I I thought we assumed that they were going to do some version of 4-3-3 with Dewsbury Hall,
Mm-hmm.
kind of playing that more attacking role. But now it looks like he's going to be on the bench because and you might have to do 4-2-3-1 to get your attackers in. But signing Pedro Neto, okay, Joao Felix might play instead of Nkunku, I guess.
Yeah.
But I just don't know how much these signings change what I would think of. What would be my first choice front four if I was managing Chelsea? And then there's the other issue, the deeper issue, which is you only have so many minutes. And when
Yeah.
you sign all these young players, you're hoping that you can invest minutes in those young players to make them better, to make their value grow and their ability grow, while also being good enough on the pitch, right, to achieve whatever your
Yeah.
goal is. Now it feels like Chelsea certainly cannot give enough minutes to all these players to develop them, or they're not going to be as good as they hope to be, or as good as they need to be to get out of the financial hole they've dug for themselves. So I'm at this point. It just feels like the things that Chelsea need to get from this season feel like completely at odds with one another.
Yeah, for sure. I think that, obviously it feels to me with the way Chelsea has been run in the last year and a half, 2 years, we're all, I'm the first one to give the benefit of the doubt. And I thought, oh, they're coming in, they probably have a really solid plan of what they're doing, how they're doing things. But it's starting to remind me of that scene in the Forrest Gump movie where he's running and people are running behind him, or he's going to do something like, yeah, well, something big is going to happen, let's run behind him. And then it becomes a movement. And then he goes and stops at a point, right? And then he turns around and says, like, I'm tired, I want to go home. Like, I think we're getting to that point with this approach here, that I still like believe that they are smart people, very smart people, very rich people that are trying to do this. And I think football for a long time cried out for football clubs being operated more as traditional businesses, like that there is a profit and loss and you have to balance your books and all that. But I think that, sometimes when I hear things where, well, we're building a portfolio of players, this is our assets, and this is how we're going to grow this portfolio, and the valuations are increasing. The problem, the one issue is that I think all that is great, but there is some fundamental kind of levers, as you mentioned in football, is on any given match day, there's only 900 minutes, 900 or 990,000 minutes to go around for 11 players, including the goalkeeper. If you have 45, or I don't know, I heard any number between 53 and 43 for the first team players in Chelsea. If you have that many players, how are we going to give minutes to all those players? And the valuation of these players is going to go down if they don't play regular minutes. and your asset is going to lose value. And it's not that I'm buying these small startups and let them run on their own, because that you can't compare them to a portfolio of small companies or investments, because they all are working on their own in their own space, and they're mostly independent of each other. But here you're talking about if one player plays, like let's say Chelsea has like 7 goalkeepers on the books. So if only one goalkeeper plays,
they could
90
all
minutes,
play, Ravi.
and so you're saying all the other 6 they won't play. So you have to see that there is that another if you're just purely looking at it as a business, you have to look at that aspect with football, that you have to look at it. And Chelsea also doesn't have like a multi-club ownership group. I know they have, I think they have a big stake in Strasbourg, but just one club. Again, it's also, even if you have 6 clubs, it's not that I'm going to buy players at Premier League prices and just simply move them to Liga or Belgium. Or it doesn't work that way, right? It's not as straightforward. So that's one side on the business side. So I don't know what the end game or end strategy here is. And then I'm also not going to go into the details that a lot of these players, they're bought them at their highest prices. Like, it's almost like they're buying very, very high, like Enzo Fernandez, Mudryk, like you name it. Like almost every player they buy is at pretty much the peak value. The second aspect is more tactical, more day-to-day operational at the club. And normally, if you look at it, it's normal in preseason to have 35 players, 40 players. 40 is big, but in the first 2 weeks of the preseason, where you have the first team players that have guaranteed contracts, then there are some academy kids that did well the previous season. You want to see how they do with the first team. And then you have a bunch of free agents or trialists, as they call them, that are just trying to fight for their new contract. So you end up having these big groups of 35 players, let's say. But the idea of that is that they cut that down within the first 2 weeks of the preseason. Usually preseason is 5 to 6 weeks. So you cut it down at the end of the second week, you want to have more of 2 players per position, 3 or maybe 4 goalkeepers in preseason, and maybe 3 or 4 other players. So you're talking about 20 plus 4 goalkeepers plus another 5 players, like 30. That's what you want your squad to be, ideally, when you go to your first preseason camp after the first 2 weeks of where most of it is fitness and testing and all that. You want to do that. But here we have 45 first team contracted players, and we have already played a game into the season. So it's like locker rooms could be an issue. Gym could be an issue. Like it's just a lot of group to manage in a training pitch. Like most of the training drills are like the biggest training drill in any football training is the 11 versus 11, right? So that uses 22 players. Now, if you have 40, like let's say 40 outfield players, if you have 40 outfield players, that's worth, you need like 4, you can field 4 11 versus 11 teams. That's not, football training grounds are not built to handle things, or football coaching staffs, they're not built to handle that on a day-to-day basis. They can do that for a little bit at the beginning of the preseason because they are trying to weed out players that they don't need. But they can't do that. And so here we are, and it's a problem. And I think I caught a comment from Jamie Carragher. I think I was reading a Spanish paper, and they were talking about Jamie Carragher about the Joao Felix thing. They asked him about Joao Felix, more importantly, they asked him, where do you think Joao Felix will play for Chelsea? And he said, well, I think before figuring that out, they need to figure out where Joao Felix is going to change to go to train. And I think, as a player, I perfectly get, as a player, he hits a point that I've seen in, I've spent time in training grounds, so I know what he means. It's really like the locker rooms are set up to have 30, 35 players or 30 probably, because what they don't want is at the end of once the season starts, they don't want empty lockers, too many of them, maybe one or two for a signing they want to sign later on or something. But for the most part, they want that group to be intimate and they want the setting to be intimate. So you don't want you want everything to be occupied. Everybody have, players on either side of whether it's a circular one or a rectangular one, whatever it is. So with 40 players, like, what we used to do for trialists and young academy players is that academy players used to go and change in their own academy locker room in the building. For the trialists who are external, they would double them up in a locker. Like, well, you guys don't have a contract, so for now, just use this locker. But now we're talking about guys that don't have a contract. But here we're talking guys making £200,000 a week, £150,000 a week. How are you going to ask them to share a locker? Like, I'm not saying they're doing it in Chelsea, but that's the kind of logistic issues that drive people at the ground, especially the coaching staff, insane, and they won't be able to spend time with these guys. So I think that these are all the other things that need to be thought of before when you're thinking about the idea of, like, I'm going to build this portfolio of players and how this is going to work. Like, it's not as simple as I have the money, I can buy these players, and buying young players is great. Buying players with good potential, good physical metrics, everything at that age, all of that is great. But like, there is need to be more. I think it's a lack of. I mean, it's easy to say that they don't have experience, but I think they also have a lot of football people in the building. So, but maybe they need to listen to them more when they're doing this. I just cannot understand how this is all going to work out.
No, I mean, who can? And it feels like a waste of last season. Like, they got through last season reasonably well in the end, despite all the turmoil. And if they managed to convince Pochettino to stay, and they'd said, right, okay, we're going to just add a couple of parts and kind of try and build this slowly, then you'd have at least had the benefit of everybody getting to know one another over the course of that year and developing some sort of harmony out of this situation. And now instead they've just like turned it all over again, turned over the coaching staff, turned over the playing staff. It just feels like, I don't know, just it's permanent chaos. We always end up saying stuff like there are smart people working there, but I went to a fancy university, and when I turned up there, I was just like, everyone's going to be so smart. And obviously there were a ton of smart people there, but I also, after a while, realized that some of the thickest people I'd ever met in my life were there. And it wasn't because they didn't have like the ability, it's because they assumed they were so smart that they could never be stupid. And it does sort of feel like maybe there's an element of that going on at the moment.
Yeah, that's for sure. I was reading a book yesterday. It's called The Company of One. It's a very interesting book. I stumbled upon a quote where it's talking about knowledge is knowing that tomato is a fruit, and wisdom is knowing not to put it in a fruit salad. I thought that's, it's like knowledge is more, I think it's more accessible to a lot more people. I think wisdom is what you have to sometimes, when you apply data, that's why I always talk about when data analytics, using that is very good, but you also have to look at how that is going to manifest and how that applies. Sometimes all that we measure may not be important. Sometimes some of the things that are important we can't measure today, if you're talking about football analytics. So I think we have to be cognizant of that and use that, understand that both analytics and traditional approach not using analytics both have their blind spots, but there are different types of blind spots. So you have to blend them too to be able to minimize your blind spots. And you still make mistakes, but the idea is to minimize that blind spot. And to me, I think that quote goes a long way into saying, instead of like, okay, I want to buy good young players, but how many can play, and also the other thing a lot of teams talk about is who is going out for me to get a new player in. Like if they ask that simple question at the end of last season, well, we have all these young players. This is like we have a squad of X number of players. We like these 6-7 new players.
Yeah.
Well, we want to bring them in. Who is going up? Like that is like fundamental. And because selling players, or you need to start thinking about moving players earlier in the windows, earlier in the in the off season, and have a plan for it. Because as I said, selling players is very difficult because everybody wants a deal, and especially if they know that you are forced to sell, then it's even harder to sell.
Yeah. Well, should we move on from Chelsea's squad construction issues? Because frankly, I think we could probably go forever on this.
Oh yeah.
And should we actually move on to another side who kind of have a squad construction issue of their own, despite being maybe the most talented squad in world football? Real Madrid started off their Spanish campaign with a 1-1 draw with Mallorca. Focus all on Kylian Mbappe, obviously, playing as a 9-ish in this game. And last season, in fact, the last couple of seasons, maybe the one before last more, Real Madrid managed to kind of do something smart and make a useful forward line out of a team which had nobody who wanted to play on the right. You know, whether it was pushing on Valverde or using previously Lucas Vazquez as a kind of a flying right back. They were able to do it. Rodrigo was able to deputize out there, or they played a kind of front two. But now, with Mbappe there, it really does feel like that team is absolutely stacked with guys who just want to play on the left. And is this a situation where it's as simple as that? Like, that is the problem that needs to be solved?
Talking about Mbappe, I was watching the broadcast. They have an Mbappe cam throughout the game.
Of course they do.
So it was kind of ridiculous, but par for course with anything to do with Real Madrid, Barcelona in Spain. It was a typical Real Madrid season opener in August, away game in Mallorca type feel to it. It looks a lot like, as I mentioned earlier, these are extension, and we're slowly moving from preseason into season. So this is a game that was sort of like a bridge game, you could say. The left side, they're absolutely stacked on the left side. I think everybody wants to go there. So Mbappe started as the nominal 9, and Vinny Jr. on the left side, as usual, cutting inside with his right foot. Mbappe and Vinny both want their starting positions to be right on the left touchline, receive the ball there, and then make the run, or start running there and receive the ball in space that way. So you could clearly see that they both go there, and then there was a vacant space, and you could see there was no. I think Rodrigo tried to cover the 9 space in the middle top of the box, but one other thing that exacerbated the situation is that Jude was playing this top of the diamond, or sort of that position where the way they did last year was like a 4-3-3 with Jude as kind of a false. You can call it a 4-3-3 with the false 9, or you can say the 2 wingers cutting inside, Rodrigo and it looked at times like a diamond with with Jude at the top of the diamond, right? So he was readily there in that central space, and he was making those runs into the box, and you could see his numbers, like a lot of goals and a lot of chances he was at the end of. And it was just you could see like he was setting records in the first probably 10 weeks of the season. Every week he was breaking a record for most goals scored for a Real Madrid player that is not a forward, in X number of games. So, but now in this new setup, he's playing as this left-sided 8 in a 4-3-3. He was also playing on the left side. So that central space wasn't easily accessible for him to get into as easily as he was set up in the previous season. So he ended up meant that he couldn't get into the box as often as he was getting in last year. And so like there is now Real Madrid still have a problem, is that they don't have a 9, which was last year. But last year Jude sort of papered that exceptionally well. And then they had Joselu coming off the bench in the last 15, 20 minutes when they take off Rodrigo or one of the other guys. And he'll come on and he'll basically change the focus of their attack. And it made teams very difficult for them to defend him. And he helped himself for a lot of goals that way as well. So, so I think that's going to be a situation we'll see. I was surprised that Endrick didn't come on. I thought the game was screaming for a center forward like him to come on. And then, I think they could have won the game. They could have had more chances to win the game. Again, after 60th minute, both teams sort of physically diminished. And so there wasn't really much going on. It didn't look like a frantic Real Madrid end to the game. If you look at last season, they were coming back in every Champions League knockout second leg. They were down a goal or they're 1-1 and they're coming back in the last 10, 15 minutes. It didn't look like that, anything like that this game towards the end. So I think this is something to watch out at how they solve this. If Endrick does come into the game, and I think he'll be effective, if that happens, who is going to be left out? That's a good question to think about. Mbappe will, I think, maybe we'll learn to play as a 9, but I do think that eventually, I think he's most effective when he's coming from the left. So they'll have to solve that. But anyway, it's one game, so can't really draw too many conclusions. But that's something that was very evident in that game.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't see the match. I saw some of the highlights later, but I was looking at the stats and I was kind of like, how is Mbappe getting like 17 progressive receptions in this game if he's playing as a forward? Like you just don't really see that, right? Except for guys out wide. It's finding that guy that far upfield is hard. What's interesting about it, I think, Mbappe did have that first season, I think, when he went to PSG where he played on the right-hand side with Neymar on the left. So I suppose he has that ability, but then he's going to say, I'm the biggest star here. Why am I the guy playing out of position? Rodrigo probably is the happiest and best at playing on the right of those guys, but Rodrigo is also maybe a guy who you can afford to cut so you can play somebody else, because also there's going to be a midfielder who's out of this as well, because you can't play Valverde, Bellingham, Camavinga, Chouameni all at the same time, plus 3 guys in the front line. It reminds me, it's a more exaggerated version of the problem, but it reminds me of when Suarez first went to Barcelona. And we remember it obviously as like this kind of astounding campaign. But when he first came back from that ban, there was a difficult teething period where Luis Enrique was trying to figure out, how do I get Messi in the zone that Messi needs to be in while I've got Suarez on the field? And it kind of took a while before they worked out a system where Suarez would kind of go wide so that Messi could come inside. The question will be, how tactically intelligent is Mbappe to go along with his incredible football ability? Like, how much can he perform that role and how willing is he to do it? That's a really big question, because as much as it is Real Madrid, it's not like it used to be where he'd have gone in a front line with, Benzema and Ronaldo or something, and it would have been, you're going to do what you're told. Now, he's not wrong in thinking that he's the biggest draw in world football.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think just the amount of pages and airtime that has been devoted the last couple of years about when he's coming, and like I think the main papers in Madrid have stationed a permanent journalist in Paris for just Mbappe news, for the top TV programs, sports programs. They have a guy in who goes to the PSG training ground every day and just said, oh, Mbappe came in this car and waved his hand today or whatever, something just like that. They've done that for more than a year. So after doing all this and they get him in, and he will probably not be the one that is going to adjust here. I'm sure he'll make some changes. I think he'll make some subtle adjustments, but I don't think it'll be as big as saying, well, I'm gonna now just play as a 9 that just stays in the middle lane most of the time, or worse, I'm gonna play on the right side. I don't know if Vinny Jr. can play on the right side and be as effective. I think Rodrigo, if they keep playing this lineup, I think Rodrigo will get a lot of goals. Like, he scored the goal this game. But I think I think the left side will get so much attention from opponents because everyone is there. All the dangerous players are there. I think the right side he can help himself for like a very good season in terms of goals. But again, I think with Real Madrid, I always my theory on them is that they always look sluggish and poor at the start of seasons. I think that they will have everything figured out by when February 25 comes around, Champions League knockout rounds, they're ready to go. That's me, that's their goal always. Like they always build up to that phase of the last 3-4 months of the season. So, I won't be too worried right now. But the left side is something to see how they solve it over the next few games.
It does make me think, before we move on, we're going to go on to Manchester United. It does make me think that there would have been a useful role if they'd kept hold of Achraf Hakimi. Because especially with someone like Alaba there, you could see that kind of back four flexing into a back three, and then you've got somebody who naturally wants to provide width on the right. As it is, maybe it is going to be Rodrigo, maybe it is going to be Goulet, or maybe next year it'll be Trent Alexander-Arnold. I don't know. It feels like there's a lot of space to occupy on that right wing. Shall we go on to Manchester United? We can finish up there. It was the first game of the Premier League season, and United won, and deservedly so. They were the better team. They were comfortably the better team by expected goals. The goal came for Zirkzee, which is obviously like a nice start for him. I don't really feel particularly convinced that United have fixed anything by this game.
Well, I mean, I think Bruno as a false nine, I didn't quite like it. I don't think it was okay, but like he did get a lot of shots, but it was not. It looked a bit labored there. It didn't look again like first game of the season. A team like United or any team, the teams that look sharp, we can commend them that they look sharp. But I think the teams that look sluggish or up and down, we can't be too harsh on them, or like we can't be too concerned about them just because it's the first game. And most importantly, they got off to a winning start, which I think calms everything down. And the pressure on I think the training this week they're going to look a lot better this weekend, I would think, just because the weight is. They won that first game. It was a difficult game at home. It was 0-0 till very late in the game. So I think all of that will help. But overall, they looked okay. I mean, they looked like as good as a team in the first week of the season with some, as I said, big issues. I think Bruno, they have to play with the 9, not Bruno there. And I thought the back line looked very good. Ravi, we talked about in a couple of, probably the last podcast. I thought he just slotted in and made a difference. He created a lot. I mean, he initiated a lot of dangerous attacks, and I thought he was generally very influential. And when they have a lot, and they had a lot of the ball, so I think I thought he looked very good. Again, like Fernandes, we know he's excellent. I thought Lisandro Martinez. Sorry about that. Lisandro Martinez looked very good. So I thought the back line looked pretty good.
I thought Maguire was honestly pretty good as well. I was kind of impressed. And the midfield, they got a lot of defensive work out of them. I mean, Kobbie Mainoo, I think, made 8 tackles and interceptions in this game, and I was kind of interested with that. At the same time, there were lots of moments in this game where I thought, well, any team with more attacking quality would punish you here. Like it was quite. There were quite a few times where you had somebody like Smith Rowe running into space, and he's just not quite fast enough to run away from those midfielders, and he doesn't have support that's quite good enough. And Fulham were really poor at playing out in this game. They're about 3% below their kind of passing average for last season. So. Yes, the defenders were good, and they did dominate this game, and especially jumping passing lanes. I thought Martinez was particularly good, made a load of interceptions. But it also felt like against a better team, these guys are going to have to do more defending, and they've got Brighton away next weekend, and they've got Liverpool at home the week after that. And I thought that's an interesting test. because they were really aggressive in this match. Like their passes per defensive action were very low, just over 7. They made tons of interceptions. That 4-4-2 kind of press out of possession, I don't think it was like, it wasn't my favorite for them to build in, but Fulham didn't pass out very well. So, I mean, it kind of got the job done, I guess. I don't know.
I think Fulham probably missing a little bit of Tim Ream's passing from the back, from a center back position. But anyway, a big game. It's a good start for them that they need to get 3 points, especially looking at the rivals they have coming up. Like they could be with 3 points after 3 games too. Like it's
Sure.
not completely. I thought Brighton. I didn't watch the game, but they, from what I've read, they looked pretty impressive. Herzler's first game looked pretty impressive, but something that I want to focus on this week. Just look at Brighton, but yeah, like I think I agree with you that if it was a tougher fixture, I think they would have had much more difficulty getting that result. It was a good start, I think, just getting those 3 points. But again, like I think we can't answer anything very definitively. We'll see what they do the next couple of games. I think those would be like bigger tests.
My worry with United a little bit is that I don't know what it's like for you, whether we're in the kind of same like football news ecosystems, but here there's been a really big sense of like United might surprise people this season. They might be better than we think. And to some degree, I think that's possible in that they've essentially been unmanaged, is how I felt about them last season. So a bit of management might improve them. But on the other hand, last season, they played like the 15th best side in the league or something. Yeah. And if they hadn't got the bounces, then they'd have been really struggling at the bottom of the league rather than looking kind of okay higher up the table.
Yeah, I mean, it's a low bar to clear. Like, they'd surprise people based on last season. I know they won the FA Cup, but the regular season underlying numbers, I think it's not a huge bar. And when I hear things like that, okay, surprise in what way? Like, what were you expecting? Like, what do you think I was expecting from United?
But here I think that, but I think when people say it, they mean like top 4, Ravi. Like, I think that is what they mean. Like, there are people who are predicting them to get in the top 4 or Europa League places, and I think United could be a lot better than last season. Like, play a lot better than last season and finish 10th. Like, that's totally in play. Because of how bad they were last season and how fortunate they were.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I would put them somewhere 6th, 7th, or where I think that's where I would see them probably. But I agree with you.
Well, we can always hope for lower. That's the main thing. I think that brings us to the end of our episode for this week. Obviously, it was. There's so much more to learn about these teams. It's very early stages and there are still transfers going on. So I think we're going to continue to focus on transfers principally until the window's at an end. But we will start to get some information coming in over the next few weeks. And there are some really big fixtures coming up. Thank you very much, Ravi. And thank you to everybody for listening, watching. If you've enjoyed this, please drop us a like. Please subscribe to the channel. Make sure that you drop us a review on your favorite podcast app. Subscribe to the newsletter and our social media feeds. And we will catch you again later in the week. We're also, looks like we're going to have a Spanish special with you and Sid Lowe. Is that right, Ravi?
Yeah, I think, we're still waiting for confirmation from Sid. Very busy man. And also La Liga makes it difficult for him. Their opening weekend or opening fixtures lasted 5 days. They started on a Thursday, ended on a Monday. Cool. Yeah, so
normal. I mean, fair enough. Like, but yeah, that does sound like quite a long weekend. Okay, we will catch you all next time. Thanks very much. Bye bye.
Thanks, Patrick. Bye.